If I could choose, I would never have been born into this world where your shadow looms over every breath I take." Those were the last words Miriam ever heard from her brother, Thomas, words heavy with anger and regret, whispered in the cold silence of a fractured family home. And then, just like that, he was gone. But death was only the beginning. Because years later, in the arms of the very sister he hurt most, Thomas returned, not as a man, but as a child with eyes that held the weight of a lifetime's sorrow and the promise of redemption. The news of Thomas's death arrived with the merciless clarity of a thunderclap, shattering the fragile calm Miriam had built around her heart. For years, she had buried the pain, the betrayal, and the silence between them like a wound that refused to heal. But now, standing over the cold ground where he was laid to rest, something inside her cracked. Could the one who caused her the deepest hurt be forgiven? Even as the world moved on, Miriam's life twisted in ways she never expected. For the past had found its way back to her doorstep in the form of a newborn baby, innocent and fragile, yet inexplicably tied to the brother she once loved and lost. And the question that haunted her was no longer why, but how. How could a heart so broken learn to forgive? This is the story of rebirth, of mercy carved out from pain, and a family forced to confront the impossible truth. That sometimes, forgiveness is the greatest act of courage we can ever offer. The funeral was a muted affair, soaked in rain and shadow. The sky wept as if mourning the broken threads of a family torn apart long before Thomas's final breath. Miriam stood stiffly beside the small grave, her coat pulled tight, hands clenched so fiercely her nails bit into her palms. Around her, distant murmurs floated, condolences from neighbors, polite offers of sympathy that felt hollow to her ears. Her mind, however, was a storm raging louder than any thunder. Why now? She asked herself. Why did his death stir a chaos I thought I had buried? Thomas had not just been a brother, he had been a force of destruction in their lives. The reckless decisions, the broken promises, the nights when his absence screamed louder than any presence ever could. She remembered the nights she lay awake listening to her younger sisters cry, clutching their stomachs with hunger, their hearts shattered because Thomas had left them without support, without care. His departure was not just a leaving, it was a wound, a betrayal that had etched bitterness into every corner of her being. Yet now, standing there in the muddy cemetery, Miriam felt an unexpected weight settling deep inside her chest, a mix of sorrow, anger, and something far more complicated, a yearning for peace. She thought back to their childhood, a time when the world had seemed kinder, when Thomas was not a source of pain but a brother who chased fireflies with her in the summer dusk, who held her hand when shadows scared her in the dark. That boy was lost somewhere beneath the man who had torn their family apart. Was that boy dead? Or was he still alive inside the man's broken soul? The days that followed were a blur. The house Miriam had once called home felt hollow, haunted not just by Thomas's absence, but by the silence of unspoken regrets. Her sisters tried to comfort each other, but their words fell flat against years of resentment. Then one morning, a fragile light broke through the heaviness. Lily, Miriam's youngest sister, announced she was pregnant. The news was met with mixed emotions, joy tinged with uncertainty, hope laced with fear. And when Lily's baby was born, the whole family gathered around the tiny cradle, their eyes wide with wonder. The baby's name was Grace. From the moment Grace opened her eyes, Miriam was struck by something she could not explain. There was a softness in those eyes, a knowingness beyond her months of life. On more than one occasion, Grace's gaze met Miriam's with an intensity that made her heart stop, as if the child could see the burdens she carried, the walls she built, and still offered nothing but pure love. Miriam struggled with this mysterious connection. Could it be coincidence, or was Grace somehow connected to Thomas? Was she, in some inexplicable way, a second chance, a rebirth? The thought terrified Miriam. How could she face the child of the man who had hurt them so deeply? How could she love what she feared? But Grace had a way of drawing out the best in those around her. She laughed with a light that shattered the darkest moments, and her innocence softened the sharp edges of old wounds. Slowly, Miriam began to share her pain with Grace in quiet moments, stories of loss, of betrayal, and of hope. And Grace listened, as if she understood, offering the kind of love that did not judge or hold grudges. Forgiveness is not a weakness, but a bridge, a path that allows us to cross from pain into healing. It asks us to look beyond the mistakes, beyond the hurt, and see the humanity in ourselves and others. To forgive is to free the soul, to open the heart, and to embrace the possibility of love even when it feels impossible. As Grace grew, so did Miriam's understanding that forgiveness was not a single act but a journey. It required patience, courage, and the willingness to confront the past without letting it chain the future. And in that journey, Miriam discovered something profound: that the child who carried Thomas's spirit was not just a symbol of rebirth but a living lesson in unconditional love. Grace's first breath was soft, almost as if the world was holding its own in anticipation. The midwife whispered blessings as the tiny infant cried, a sound so pure and fragile it seemed to echo into the very corners of Miriam's fractured soul. For the first time in many years, Miriam felt a stirring inside her heart, like the tentative flutter of a long-forgotten hope. The house was quiet, save for the gentle cooing of Lily as she cradled her daughter. Miriam sat in the corner, wrapped in a heavy shawl, her eyes fixed on the baby, as if watching a delicate flower bloom through cracks in cold stone. Grace's tiny fingers curled around Lily's thumb, her dark eyes wide open, observing everything with an uncanny stillness. Miriam found herself drawn again and again to those eyes that seemed to carry memories far beyond her months of life. It was as if the child held a secret, an unspoken story. As days turned to weeks, Grace's presence began to alter the family's atmosphere. The air felt lighter, laughter seeped back into rooms where silence had reigned for too long, and old wounds seemed to ache a little less. But Miriam's heart was a battleground. She loved this child, yet the bitterness rooted in Thomas's memory clawed at her relentlessly. One evening, long after the household had quieted, Miriam found herself alone in the nursery. She sat on the floor, back pressed against the wall, and watched Grace sleep. The baby's soft breaths rose and fell like the ocean's tide. Steady, peaceful, innocent. "Why do you remind me so much of him?" Miriam whispered into the night. Her voice cracked with the weight of years. "How can I love you when all I feel is the hurt he left behind?" Grace stirred, eyes fluttering open. For a moment, their gazes locked, and Miriam's defenses wavered. She saw something in Grace's face, a warmth, a promise, a reflection of mercy that pierced through the armor of pain. From that night on, Miriam began to change. She talked to Grace not just as a niece, but as a living embodiment of hope. She told stories of the past, of love and loss, mistakes and forgiveness. Grace listened with a quiet attentiveness that made Miriam feel as though the child understood the weight of every word. Miriam's own heart softened, and she found herself praying, not for the past to be erased, but for strength to embrace what lay ahead. As Grace reached her second birthday, she began to show signs of an extraordinary empathy. At family gatherings, she would instinctively reach out to soothe a crying cousin or sit quietly beside someone who looked troubled. It was as if she carried an innate understanding that went beyond her years. Miriam watched in awe and apprehension. Could this little girl, born from the ashes of a broken family, be the key to healing? Yet, not everyone shared Miriam's growing hope. Her parents, Lily and the rest of the family, remained cautious. Some whispered that Grace was a symbol too heavy to bear, a reminder of the pain they'd rather forget. Others feared that clinging to the past would only deepen the wounds. But Miriam held firm. She believed that Grace's presence was a gift, a second chance for the family to rewrite their story with compassion instead of bitterness. One afternoon, Miriam took Grace for a walk through the garden, where she and Thomas had once played as children. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Grace toddled ahead, picking flowers and examining the earth with wide-eyed wonder. Miriam followed slowly, memories swirling around her like a gentle storm. Stopping by the old oak tree, their childhood's silent witness, Miriam knelt and spoke softly. "Thomas and I were close once, you know," she said, tracing the bark with her fingers. "But he made mistakes. He hurt us in ways that left scars. I didn't know if I could ever forgive him." Grace sat beside her, looking up with innocent eyes. "But love," Miriam continued, "love can grow even in the hardest places. It can mend what seems broken. That's what you teach me, little one." Grace reached out, taking Miriam's hand, squeezing it gently. In that touch was a quiet power. The strength to forgive, the courage to heal, and the grace to begin anew. True forgiveness does not come from forgetting the pain, but from choosing to rise above it. It is the courage to break the cycle of bitterness and open one's heart to love again. Healing begins when we see others not as enemies, but as flawed beings capable of change, and when we grant ourselves permission to be free. That evening, Miriam wrote in her journal, a habit she had begun to process the tumult within. "Grace is more than a child. She is a living testament that life does not end with pain. Each day with her is a lesson in mercy, reminding me that forgiveness is not a destination but a journey. I pray I am strong enough to walk it." The soft hum of dawn was barely audible when Miriam woke that morning, the first pale light filtering through the lace curtains casting delicate patterns on the worn wooden floor. For a moment she lay still, listening to the steady, rhythmic breathing of Grace sleeping beside her in the modest crib. The innocence on the child's face was a fragile promise, untouched by the cruelty that life often wielded. But Miriam knew better than to believe innocence alone could shield Grace forever. The weight of family secrets and silent grudges pressed heavily against her chest, a quiet storm threatening to unravel the fragile peace Grace had brought to their lives. The past, with its jagged edges, was never far away. Miriam rose quietly, careful not to wake Lily, who had been struggling with exhaustion since the baby's birth. The house was still, only the faintest sounds of the early city morning whispered through the cracked windows. A distant dog barking, the rustle of leaves in a hesitant breeze, footsteps on the worn pavement outside. Wrapping herself in a knitted shawl, Miriam stepped outside into the chill of the morning air. She wandered toward the garden, the place where so many memories lived, some filled with laughter, others etched in pain. She knelt beside a patch of wildflowers and ran her fingers through the earth, breathing in the damp scent of soil and growth. It was here that Thomas had once promised he would never leave. That promise had shattered like glass. Miriam's thoughts drifted back to the fractured moments that had defined their family's fall. Thomas's descent into reckless choices, the nights he disappeared, the lies whispered in shadows, the silence when help was needed most. Each memory was a wound reopened, a scar that refused to fade. Yet, intertwined with these painful recollections was a flicker of understanding. What had driven Thomas to break apart the family? Was it anger? Fear? Regret? Or was he simply lost? A soul battered by his own demons, reaching out desperately but failing to grasp love. These questions haunted Miriam relentlessly, weaving themselves into the fabric of her every thought. As the day unfolded, Grace's laughter echoed through the rooms, a buoyant melody that breathed life into the tired walls. Miriam watched her niece explore the world with unbounded curiosity, touching every surface, tasting every discovery, embracing each moment with pure wonder. But beneath the innocence, Miriam sensed an old soul. Grace often paused, eyes searching as if trying to connect invisible threads, memories not her own. One afternoon, while reading a children's book under the shade of the ancient oak tree, Grace turned to Miriam, her gaze steady. "Why do you look sad sometimes, Auntie Miriam?" she asked in her small voice, tilting her head. Miriam's throat tightened. How could she explain the complex weight of years in words simple enough for a child? "I'm not sad, sweetheart, just thinking about people I love, and how sometimes, even when we love them, things get very hard." Grace nodded thoughtfully, as if she understood the unspoken. The next weeks were a delicate dance between past and present. Miriam found herself confronting painful truths she had long buried. She reached out to old friends, letters, and photographs, piecing together fragments of Thomas's life she had never dared to face. She learned of the loneliness that had shadowed him, the mistakes that had spiraled beyond control, and the moments of regret that had come too late. Through it all, Miriam's heart softened, not in forgetting the pain, but in recognizing the shared humanity beneath. At night, she began to speak openly with Lily and the others about forgiveness, the hardest lesson they all had to learn. They gathered around the fireplace, sharing memories not to accuse, but to heal. Miriam spoke with trembling honesty. Forgiveness doesn't mean we erase what happened. It means we choose not to carry the poison of anger forever. It means freeing ourselves so love can grow again. Her sisters listened, tears glistening as old wounds began to breathe life into new hope. Grace, too, grew in wisdom beyond her years. One evening, she approached Miriam with a hand-drawn picture. 2 trees, one barren and broken, the other blooming with vibrant flowers. "This is you and Uncle Thomas," Grace explained softly. "He was broken. But now, because of love, we can grow again." Miriam felt her defenses crumble. In that moment, the child who had once stirred fear and uncertainty became a beacon of light, guiding them all toward healing. The journey to forgiveness is rarely simple. It demands courage to face the darkest shadows of the past, and the grace to embrace the imperfect nature of those we love. Healing begins when we stop carrying bitterness as a burden and start planting seeds of compassion, not only for others but for ourselves. That night, Miriam journaled by the soft glow of a lamp. "Today I see that love is not a finite resource. It expands when shared, heals when offered freely, and transforms even the deepest pain. Grace is teaching me that rebirth is possible, not just for her but for all of us who dare to forgive." The morning sun spilled through the curtains in golden streams, casting a warm glow on the modest kitchen where Miriam sat alone, nursing a cup of tea that had long since gone cold. The house was unusually quiet. Lily had taken Grace for a walk in the park, hoping the fresh air would calm the restless energy that came with early childhood. But Miriam's mind was far from calm. She stared at the blank page before her. Her journal. For days she had tried to write about her journey, the tangled web of pain and forgiveness, but the words escaped her like shadows slipping through her fingers. There was a silence inside her that screamed louder than any voice, a heaviness that no amount of ink could lighten. Memories surged unbidden, the years of silence between her and Thomas, the harsh words left unspoken. The moments when a simple conversation might have saved them from the chasm that grew between them. She remembered how Thomas had always been a man of few words, his emotions buried beneath layers of pride and hurt. His silence had been as much a weapon as his actions, a wall that shut out those who wanted to help, including Miriam. That silence had bred misunderstanding, bitterness, and loneliness. And now, years later, Miriam wrestled with her own silence. The words she had refused to say, the forgiveness she hesitated to voice. The weight of this silence pressed heavily on her conscience. Could forgiveness ever be truly granted if it remained unspoken? Miriam knew the answer in her heart. Forgiveness was not merely an internal decision, it was a dialogue, a reaching out that required courage to speak, to acknowledge, and to heal. She rose and walked to the living room, where a stack of old letters lay untouched. They were letters Thomas had written in his final years, apologies never sent, confessions never shared, regrets etched on paper stained by tears. With trembling hands, Miriam unfolded one letter. "Miriam, if you ever read this, know that I am sorry. For the hurt, for the silence, for the distance I created. I wish I had found the strength to say these things before. Please forgive me." Her breath caught. The words were raw, vulnerable, the mirror of a soul longing for peace. Tears spilled freely as Miriam whispered back, "I forgive you, Thomas. I have been afraid. But I forgive you." That day marked a turning point. Miriam began to write letters of her own, not to be sent, but to express the love, pain, and forgiveness that dwelled within. She shared these letters with Lily, and eventually read some aloud to Grace, who listened with the wisdom of one far beyond her years. Through this process, Miriam found a voice she thought lost, a voice that spoke of healing and hope. Meanwhile, Grace blossomed into a curious, compassionate child. Her questions became deeper, often circling around the nature of family, love, and forgiveness. One afternoon, while playing with her dolls, Grace asked, "Why do people sometimes say things that hurt, even if they love each other?" Miriam knelt beside her, searching for the simplest way to explain the complex wounds of the heart. "Sometimes," she said gently, "people carry pain inside them, and that pain makes them scared or angry. They don't always know how to say what they feel, so their words come out wrong. But love means trying to understand, even when it's hard. Grace nodded thoughtfully. So, forgiving is like giving a second chance? Exactly, Miriam smiled, tears shining in her eyes. A very brave and beautiful second chance. Yet, the path was not without setbacks. Old resentments occasionally flared, conversations stumbled, and the shadows of the past lurked at the edges of their peace. But with each challenge, Miriam felt her heart grow stronger, fueled by Grace's unyielding innocence and the family's gradual willingness to rebuild. Silence can be a prison, holding us captive in pain and misunderstanding. But words, spoken with honesty and compassion, are the keys that unlock the doors to forgiveness. To heal, we must find the courage to break the silence and share the truth of our hearts. That evening, Miriam penned the closing lines in her journal. Forgiveness is a conversation, between the past and the present, between the broken and the hopeful. In giving voice to our pain and mercy, we find the freedom to live fully again. The morning sun filtered softly through the tall windows of the little schoolhouse, casting warm patterns on the dusty wooden floorboards. The air was thick with the mingled scents of chalk, old books, and the faint, sweet perfume of fresh flowers that the children had brought for their teacher. It was Grace's first day at school, a milestone that carried with it the hopes and fears of a family still learning to heal. Miriam stood at the edge of the playground, her hands trembling as she watched Grace hold tightly to Lily's fingers. The child's wide eyes sparkled with excitement and uncertainty, mirroring the emotions swirling inside Miriam's own heart. This day was more than just the start of education. It was a step into a larger world, a test of the family's newfound courage to embrace change and growth. Grace's footsteps were small but determined as she walked through the school gates, the chatter of children weaving around her like a lively river. The school was a patchwork of laughter and learning, where differences were both celebrated and challenged. For Grace, every face told a story, and every moment was a lesson, not just in reading and writing, but in human connection. Her teacher, Mrs. Adesanya, was a kind woman with eyes that seemed to understand the unspoken. She greeted Grace with a warm smile and a gentle voice, sensing the quiet strength beneath the child's soft exterior. "Welcome, Grace. We are so happy to have you here." In the days that followed, Miriam found herself reflecting on the lessons unfolding, not only for Grace but for the entire family. School was more than an academic journey, it was a mirror reflecting the values they sought to embrace: patience, kindness, and the courage to forgive others and themselves. Grace, with her natural empathy, quickly became a beacon among her classmates. She instinctively reached out to those who were lonely or struggling, sharing her lunch or offering a comforting word. Children who once kept to themselves found a friend in her, drawn by her warmth and the unspoken depth in her gaze. But school was not without its challenges. Grace faced moments of confusion and hurt, especially when questions about family arose. One day, during a story time about families, a classmate asked, "Why don't you have a father, Grace?" The question struck a chord deep within her, stirring the shadows of a complicated past she did not yet fully understand. Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she remembered Miriam's words about strength and love. "My family is different," she said softly. "But we love each other very much." Her honesty drew a hush over the room, followed by nods of understanding and acceptance. In that moment, Grace learned a profound lesson: that family is not defined solely by presence or absence, but by the bonds of love and forgiveness that hold people together. Meanwhile, Miriam grappled with her own fears. How would the wider world see Grace? A child carrying the legacy of a fractured family. Would the past follow her like a shadow, or could Grace's light break through and create a new path? She found solace in the small moments: a teacher's praise, a classmate's smile, a neighbor's kind word. Each was a thread weaving the tapestry of hope they were slowly crafting. One afternoon, Miriam attended a parent-teacher meeting, where Mrs. Adesanya shared stories of Grace's kindness and resilience. The teacher's words lifted Miriam's heart. "Grace has a remarkable gift," Mrs. Adesanya said. "She teaches others through her actions, compassion, understanding, and forgiveness. She is a living example of the lessons we all strive to learn." Miriam left the meeting with a renewed sense of purpose. Grace was not just growing up, she was growing into the very embodiment of the family's rebirth. True education extends beyond textbooks and exams. It is found in the lessons of the heart, in empathy, resilience, and the courage to love despite past pain. Children like Grace remind us that every act of kindness is a seed planted for a more forgiving and compassionate world. That evening, Miriam wrote in her journal, "Grace's journey at school mirrors our own. Steps taken with uncertainty but fueled by hope. She teaches me daily that forgiveness is not a single act but a lifelong commitment to love and understanding." The sun was setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Inside the modest living room, the family gathered around the worn wooden table, sharing a simple meal. The clinking of plates and soft laughter filled the space, a stark contrast to the heavy silences that had once ruled these walls. Miriam sat quietly, watching Grace as she animatedly recounted her day at school. The child's bright eyes sparkled with enthusiasm, her voice carrying a contagious warmth that seemed to reach every corner of the room. "Today, I helped Sarah find her lost book," Grace said, her small hands gesturing. "She was so sad, but I told her sometimes we have to be patient. Just like Auntie Miriam says." Miriam smiled, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and relief. Grace's innocent words masked the profound truth they carried. Patience was not just a virtue for children, but a necessary balm for wounded hearts. The family's story had become one of quiet transformation. Slowly but surely, the ripples of forgiveness spread beyond the immediate circle, touching neighbors, old friends, and even strangers. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. Mr. Obasi, a man who had once been close to Thomas, but had drifted away amid the years of conflict and misunderstanding. His eyes were weary, but there was a tentative hope in his step as he approached Miriam's doorstep. "I heard about Grace," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "She's a remarkable child. I wanted to come and to say I'm sorry for the part I played in the past." Miriam regarded him silently for a moment before extending her hand. "Thank you, Mr. Obasi." Forgiveness begins when we open our hearts to change. Their handshake was more than a greeting. It was a bridge spanning years of pain and regret. Meanwhile, Grace continued to grow into her role as a quiet healer. At school, she organized small acts of kindness, encouraging classmates to embrace empathy and understanding. Her teachers marveled at her maturity, often remarking how a child so young carried wisdom beyond her years. But it was at home where Grace's influence was most profound. Miriam noticed how her own sisters began to shed layers of bitterness, embracing moments of vulnerability and forgiveness. Lily confided in Miriam about the fears she had long harbored, fears of repeating past mistakes, of failing Grace. Miriam held her close and whispered, "We are all learning. Forgiveness doesn't mean perfection, it means progress." The journey was not without setbacks. Old wounds resurfaced during family gatherings, and moments of doubt tested their resolve. But each challenge was met with renewed determination, strengthened by the lessons Grace embodied. One evening, after a particularly difficult conversation, Miriam found herself alone in the garden. The stars twinkled above like silent witnesses to her thoughts. She whispered a prayer, not for an easy path, but for the strength to walk it with grace. Forgiveness is a ripple that begins in the heart but extends far beyond. It transforms not only those who receive it, but also those who offer it, creating waves of healing that can touch entire communities. To forgive is to choose love over resentment, connection over division. That night, Miriam journaled by the soft glow of a lamp. Grace is a living testament to the power of mercy. Through her, I see that healing is possible, even when the past is heavy. Our family's story is no longer one of pain, but of hope. A hope that spreads like the ripples in a still pond, reaching farther than we ever imagined. The air was thick with the scent of rain and earth as the family gathered once more beneath the sprawling canopy of the old oak tree in their garden, a silent witness to generations of memories. The sky was a heavy gray, promising a storm, but inside Miriam's heart, a quiet calm had begun to take root. Around the tree, the laughter of children mingled with the murmur of adults sharing stories. This was not the tense, fractured gathering of years past. It was a reunion transformed by forgiveness, and the delicate threads of healing woven carefully over time. Grace sat on Miriam's lap, her small hand clutching a worn photograph of Thomas, one from his childhood when innocence still gleamed in his eyes. The child's gaze lingered on the image, her young mind absorbing the weight of a history she was only beginning to understand. Miriam's gaze swept over the faces before her, siblings, cousins, neighbors, old friends, some tentative, some eager. Many had kept their distance when the family was torn by bitterness, but today they approached with open hearts, drawn by the gentle transformation that Grace's presence had kindled. It was Mr. Obasi who broke the silence. "I remember Thomas as a boy," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "He was wild, yes, but full of dreams. Somewhere along the way, we all lost our way. But seeing you all now, seeing Grace, it gives me hope. Hope that what was broken can be made whole." A hush fell, and then Lily spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "We have carried pain like a heavy stone for too long, but it is time to lay it down. To remember that we are more than our past mistakes." As the rain began to fall gently, the group scattered beneath the shelter of the house and trees, yet the warmth remained. Conversations bloomed. Shared memories, laughter, tears, all mingling to create a new family tapestry stitched with grace. Miriam felt the weight of the moment. Forgiveness was no longer just a word or a distant hope, it was a living, breathing reality unfolding before her eyes. Yet, beneath the celebration, a quiet battle still raged inside her, a fear that the past might still claw its way back, undoing all they had built. That night, Miriam sat alone in her room, the rain tapping a steady rhythm against the window. Her journal lay open, pages filled with reflections, confessions, and prayers. She wrote, "Forgiveness is not a single act, but a lifelong journey. The past will always echo in the heart, but it need not dictate the future. Through grace, I see the possibility of rebirth, not just for her but for all of us. May we have the courage to face our shadows and embrace the light." Meanwhile, Grace wrestled with her own understanding of identity. At school, she faced questions that stirred the complex legacy she carried. Friends asked about her family, about the man she never knew but who lived in their stories. One afternoon, as Miriam walked her home, Grace paused under the golden canopy of a flowering tree. "Auntie Miriam," she said hesitantly, "do you think Thomas would be proud of me?" Miriam knelt to meet her eyes, heart full. "I believe he already is, Grace. You are the forgiveness he never found, and the love that will carry us forward." Grace smiled, a lightness returning to her step. The echoes of the past may never fully fade, but they can become lessons rather than chains. Forgiveness frees us to write new stories, stories of hope, love, and redemption. It requires courage to face the pain, humility to seek healing, and faith to believe in second chances. As the storm outside softened into a gentle drizzle, Miriam felt the truth settle deep within her soul. Their family was no longer defined by loss and bitterness, but by the enduring power of mercy and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. The warm glow of the late afternoon sun spilled through the window, dust motes dancing in the gentle breeze that carried the scent of blooming jasmine. Grace, now entering her early adolescence, sat at the edge of the garden, her fingers nervously twisting the hem of her blouse. The carefree laughter of younger children playing nearby felt like a distant echo compared to the storm swirling quietly inside her. She was growing up, and with growth came questions that reached far beyond the pages of her schoolbooks. Questions about identity, belonging, and the complex legacy she bore without fully understanding. Grace's days were a delicate balance of childhood innocence and the weight of unspoken history. At school she excelled academically and was admired for her kindness, yet the inevitable whispers of curiosity and judgment about her family shadowed her like a persistent cloud. One afternoon, as she walked home from school with Miriam, a group of older students jeered behind her back, their words sharp and careless. "Look, it's Thomas's kid. Bet she's just like him. Trouble waiting to happen." Grace's heart clenched, but Miriam gently took her hand, grounding her. "Remember, Grace," Miriam whispered, "you are not defined by their words. You are your own story." That night, the quiet of her room became a refuge and a battleground. Grace pulled out her journal, a place where she poured her fears, hopes, and dreams. Why does the past follow me like a shadow? She wrote. Am I just a reminder of pain, or can I be something new, something better? Miriam, sensing the storm within her niece, sat beside her. Grace. Forgiveness is not forgetting the past. It's choosing to grow beyond it. You carry a light that can heal not just your family but yourself. Grace looked up, tears glistening. But what if I fail? Miriam smiled gently. Failure is part of growth. What matters is that you keep trying, keep loving, keep forgiving, especially yourself. As the weeks turned into months, Grace faced many crossroads, moments of doubt, anger, and hope. She began to understand that forgiveness was not a destination but a daily choice, often difficult but deeply freeing. At home, the family continued to heal. Old wounds surfaced, but were met with conversations rooted in honesty and grace. Miriam found herself growing stronger, her faith deepening as she embraced the complexities of mercy. She often reflected on the words of an old proverb Thomas had once shared: "To forgive is to set a prisoner free, and discover the prisoner was you." One pivotal day, Miriam invited the family to a small ceremony in the garden. They gathered beneath the oak tree, the symbol of their past and their future. With trembling hands, Miriam held a folded piece of paper, an old letter from Thomas, never sent, full of apology and love. She read aloud, "If only I had the courage to say these words before, but I hope in another life, or another time, you will find it in your hearts to forgive me." Tears streamed freely as each family member, one by one, spoke their own words of forgiveness, not perfect or easy, but honest and healing. Grace stood beside Miriam, her voice clear and bright. "I forgive you, Uncle Thomas, and I will live in a way that honors love, not pain." Forgiveness is an ongoing journey marked by courage and vulnerability. It requires facing the pain, acknowledging our imperfections, and choosing love, even when fear whispers otherwise. In forgiving others, we also learn to forgive ourselves, opening the door to true freedom. That evening, Miriam wrote in her journal, "Watching Grace choose forgiveness over bitterness reminds me that our greatest strength lies not in holding on to anger, but in letting go. As she grows, so does our family's hope, a hope grounded in mercy, resilience, and unending love." The first light of dawn broke gently across the horizon, spilling soft gold over the quiet village. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of dew and blooming wildflowers, a reminder that every day held the promise of renewal. For Grace, now a young woman standing at the cusp of adulthood, this morning felt like more than just the start of a day. It was the beginning of a new chapter in a story written by love, forgiveness, and hope. She stood at the edge of the garden, the same garden where her family had gathered years ago beneath the ancient oak tree, a silent witness to their journey from pain to healing. The weight of the past, once so heavy on her shoulders, now felt lighter, softened by the grace she had learned to embody. Grace's path had been anything but easy. Adolescence brought its own trials, the lingering whispers of judgment, the struggle to define herself beyond the legacy of her father's mistakes, and the challenge of forgiving not only others, but herself. Yet, through every hardship, she found strength in the lessons passed down by Miriam and the family she loved. At university, Grace pursued studies in social work, driven by a desire to help others heal from brokenness. Just as her family had, her empathy and resilience touched everyone she met, transforming pain into purpose. One evening, as she walked through the bustling campus, Grace encountered a young man who reminded her painfully of her father, not in his mistakes, but in his potential for change. His eyes held the same mix of fear and hope she knew all too well. They spoke long into the night, sharing stories of struggle and forgiveness. Grace listened, offering the kindness that had been her family's salvation. "Forgiveness," she told him softly, "is the bridge we build to walk back to ourselves and others. It is never easy, but it is always worth it." Meanwhile, Miriam watched Grace with a heart full of pride and bittersweet love. She saw in her niece the embodiment of a family's rebirth, a living testament to mercy's power to transform even the deepest wounds. Miriam's own journey continued alongside Grace's, marked by quiet moments of reflection and gratitude. She often returned to the journal where she had chronicled their story, finding strength in the words she had written. "We are not defined by our past but by the choices we make today," she had penned. Forgiveness is the light that guides us through darkness. As the years passed, the family story spread throughout their community, inspiring others to seek healing and reconciliation. Grace became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the wake of pain, love could flourish. At a gathering to honor her work, Grace spoke with a voice steady and compassionate. Our past shapes us, but it does not imprison us. We carry within us the power to forgive, to heal, and to create legacies of love that outshine the shadows. The journey of forgiveness is lifelong, weaving through generations and shaping futures. It teaches us that healing is possible when we choose love over bitterness, understanding over judgment. Our legacies are not bound by our mistakes but by our courage to embrace mercy and hope. That evening, as the sun set in a blaze of color, Miriam and Grace sat beneath the oak tree, their hands intertwined. "Thank you," Miriam whispered, "for showing us all what it means to forgive." Grace smiled, eyes shining. "Thank you, Auntie Miriam, for teaching me how to love." Together, they looked toward the horizon, where the future awaited, bright, boundless, and filled with grace. The evening sky was painted with hues of lavender and gold, the gentle breeze carrying the soft scent of jasmine through the open windows. The house, once heavy with silence and sorrow, now hummed with quiet contentment. Miriam sat by the fireplace, a worn journal resting on her lap, its pages filled with the chronicles of a family transformed. Outside, the world carried on, unaware of the quiet miracle that had unfolded within these walls. A miracle not born of magic or chance, but of something far deeper, forgiveness. Miriam's thoughts drifted back over the years, the pain she had carried, the bitterness that once seemed unbreakable, and the unexpected gift that changed everything. Grace, the child who was more than a child, a living testament to mercy's power. She recalled the first time she saw those eyes, soft, wise, and full of unspoken stories. Grace had taught her that forgiveness was not weakness, but strength, not forgetting, but healing, not ending, but beginning. The family had grown in ways Miriam never thought possible. Old wounds had scarred, yes, but those scars bore the marks of survival and resilience. Conversations that once ended in silence now blossomed into understanding. Laughter filled rooms where tears had once been the only sound. And through it all, Grace's presence was a beacon, a reminder that love could rise from even the darkest soil. One quiet afternoon, Miriam walked into the garden where Grace sat beneath the ancient oak tree, pen in hand, writing in her own journal. The child had grown into a young woman, poised and reflective, carrying the wisdom of generations. Miriam sat beside her and took her hand. "You've given us all a second chance," she said softly. Grace smiled, eyes bright. "No, Auntie Miriam, you all did. I only showed you the way." They sat in comfortable silence, the tree's branches stretching wide, embracing them like an old friend. As twilight deepened, Miriam opened her journal to the last page and wrote, "Forgiveness completes the circle of pain and love. It frees the heart, heals the soul, and renews the spirit. Our story is one of rebirth, not just of a family, but of hope itself. May we carry this lesson forward, lighting the way for others who wander in darkness. True peace is found not in forgetting the past, but in embracing it with compassion. Forgiveness closes the circle of hurt and opens the door to freedom, love, and renewal. It is a gift we give ourselves and others, one that transforms lives and leaves a legacy far greater than pain." As night fell, Miriam and Grace looked up at the stars, silent witnesses to a journey completed and a future embraced. Together, they whispered a prayer of gratitude, knowing that through forgiveness, they had found the greatest gift of all: peace. Years had passed since the fragile seeds of forgiveness were first planted in that small family's garden. The house, once shadowed by pain and silence, now echoed with warmth and laughter, a sanctuary shaped by love and second chances. Grace stood at the threshold of a new chapter in her life. With a diploma in hand and a heart full of purpose, she prepared to step into the wider world, carrying with her the legacy of a family reborn through mercy. Miriam watched her niece with quiet pride, the lines on her face softened by years of healing and hope. She thought of Thomas, not the man who had caused so much hurt, But the boy beneath the mistakes, the spirit renewed in Grace's compassionate eyes. The village had changed too. Stories of the family's journey spread beyond their home, inspiring others to seek reconciliation and peace. Grace's work in social services touched many lives, offering healing to those burdened by their own pasts. The lessons learned around the old oak tree became a beacon, reminding all who heard them that forgiveness is a path not of forgetting, but of freeing, not of erasing wounds, but of transforming them into strength. One quiet evening, beneath the same ancient tree, Miriam and Grace sat side by side, their hands intertwined like the roots that anchored the mighty oak. The stars twinkled softly above, as if blessing the journey that had brought them here. Miriam whispered, "We have traveled far, child, from pain to peace, from bitterness to love." Grace smiled, her eyes reflecting the gentle light. "And the journey continues, Auntie. Because forgiveness is a gift we keep giving." In that moment, they both understood. Rebirth is not an end, but a new beginning, a dawn of grace that illuminates every tomorrow. Life's deepest wounds can become the soil from which love and forgiveness grow. To forgive is to embrace humanity in all its brokenness and beauty. It is the courage to hope, to heal, and to renew. And in that courage, we find the truest form of freedom.